Hi everyone, welcome to Stats Rescue 911. My name is Lynn, and today I am going to take you through some of the need-to-knows of a two-way mixed analysis of variance, or ANOVA for short. This is something that definitely you will want to watch before you even attempt a two-way mixed ANOVA on SPSS. But even if you're not using SPSS to analyze data using this statistical test, it is still worth watching this video because I'm sure you're going to learn about some of the basics that will help you just with understanding. All right, so let me set the stage for you here. My students and I are doing a study where we are looking at among other things, level of religiosity, and we group people according to whether they are religious and practice frequently, religious and practice infrequently, and religious and do not practice, and not religious. All right. So this independent variable is said to be between subjects because there's no way you can be in this group and then be tested in this other group, and etc. So that's reflected by the names here. Now I know there's lots of stuff going on in this slide, but just bear with me. So Tom, Dick, and Harry are religious and practice frequently. But a different group of people, Larry, Moe, and Curly, are religious and practice infrequently. And then we have Peter, Paul, and Mary, who are religious but do not practice. And then these individuals are not religious at all. And that's Karen, Lynn, and Doug. And just so you know, yes, I ran out of trios, and so these are my siblings, Karen and Doug. All right, so here we have one independent variable. But we also have another independent variable in our study, and that is concern category. Now, before I tell you what concern category is, I think you probably need to know what our dependent variable was, and that is optimism score. So we're looking at independent variables that affect optimism, and one may very well be religiosity. All right, so whether you're in this group, this one, or that one could affect your optimism. But then we have another independent variable here that we think could affect optimism, and that's the concern category. To be honest with you, I really didn't know what to call this independent variable, but that name seemed to work the best. So we have areas of concern in our daily lives or our lives in general, and they may be related to work, personal relationships, the United States as a whole, so the country, the world globally, we just call it global world, and concern for the planet itself, right? So the concern category could very well affect optimism scores, right? Perhaps we're more optimistic for work and relationships, for example, than we are with the global world or the planet itself. Well, we'll find out, all right? So this is called the analysis that we're going to run is called a two-way mixed ANOVA because we have two factors. That's where the word two comes in. One factor is religiosity, so that's one independent variable. Factor is just another name we have for independent variable. And then the second factor is concern category. Now that's where we get the word two. Where we get mixed is this factor here is between subjects. Remember that we have a different group of people in each level of the factor. But if we look at concern category, this factor is within subjects. And that means that whoever was tested under the work subcategory, so the level work, and we can see here it's everybody, right? Tom, Dick, and Harry, Larry, Moe, and Curly, Peter, Paul, and Mary, Karen, Lynn, and Doug, right? So if we look at these people, they are also tested under the next condition, which is relationships. And then we see again that they are tested once more under the category USA, and then the same is true for global, world, and the planet itself. All right. So because everybody is tested in each condition, each level of the concern category variable, this makes concern category within subjects. So you see then why it's a mixed ANOVA. It's because one of your factors is between subjects, and the other one is within subjects. Now, you'll note that when you have two independent variables, the easiest way to visualize them is to put them in the format of a table, like I have here. So religiosity is going to be represented by the columns. This column represents this level, and then this level is represented by this column, etc. Okay, so every level is a column. Now, as you might guess, if we go and look at our other independent variable, the other factor, concern category, now each level is represented by a row. So this first row represents work, this next row represents relationships, and so on. All right? So what you get in a two-way, and it's not only for a two-way mixed ANOVA, any two-way ANOVA, you're going to put one factor up here represented by columns and one factor along the side represented by rows. All right? So we're doing this two-way ANOVA because we want to answer several questions. We want to know, first of all, does religiosity all by itself, does it have any effect on optimism? Then we want to know, does concern category all by itself have any effect on optimism? And then we want to ask the question, what about the combination of religiosity and concern category? Does that have any effect on optimism? And each of these represents a combination. So a combination of religiosity and concern category. But we'll get to that in a minute, okay? Just remember that we have three basic questions. Is there an effect of religiosity all by itself? Is there an effect of concern category all by itself? And is there a combined effect of religiosity and concern category on optimism? Okay. Now, only these arrows popped up. The reason why they popped up is because I'm going to use them to show you how we're going to test the effect of religiosity on optimism. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to focus on religiosity, and we're going to ask ourselves, what is the marginal mean for this group? Now, I know you're asking, what is a marginal mean? A marginal mean is the mean of one level of a specific factor in what we call a factorial ANOVA. So let me explain that. A factorial ANOVA is an ANOVA where you are analyzing two or more factors, two or more independent variables. So if you were running a one-way ANOVA, well, a one-way ANOVA looks at just one factor, so it's not factorial. All right, but as soon as you have two factors, 3, 4, then we call it a factorial. So now let's go back to what we mean by a marginal mean. A marginal mean is the mean for one level, all right, all scores in that level of just one factor. So here we're looking at religiosity, and if we were to figure out the mean of all the scores in this column, then we would be figuring out the marginal mean, and then RPF stands for religious practice frequently, right? And again, there's going to be scores here of optimism. There's going to be optimism scores here, here, and here, and finally here, right? Well, if you took all those scores, add them all up and divide, all right, to get a mean, this would be the marginal mean for religion practicing frequently. Then we're going to do the same thing here. So we're just looking at one factor, and we're going to look at this column, right? So this is a specific level of that factor, and we're going to add together all these scores, divide by however many scores we added up, however many numbers, and this is going to give us the marginal mean for religious practicing infrequently. And then we're just going to do the same thing here, okay? So within this factor and this specific level, we're going to add up all these scores, find the mean. So this is the marginal mean for religious not practicing. And then do the same here for this last column, and that's the marginal mean for not religious. All right? So because we have 4 levels of religiosity, we're going to end up with 4 marginal means. Okay? And you'll notice it's as if concern category doesn't exist. All right? We're focused on just religiosity, just this one factor. We're going to ignore the other factor completely. Now, when you run the two-way ANOVA, you're going to actually get 3 F values. And these F values each test a different effect. And this first F value is going to test what we call the main effect of religiosity. A main effect looks at just one specific factor and ignores the other. Right? So a main effect of religiosity would compare the mean for each level of the religiosity factor. We want to know, does religiosity alone, all by itself, have any effect on optimism scores? All right? So that F value is going to be generated in the two-way ANOVA, and if the F value is significant, that tells us that at least 2 of these means are different from each other, but who knows, maybe all of these means will be different from each other. All right, so that's the first F value. If it's found to be significant, well, then we're going to have to run follow-up tests to see which means are different from which, and that'll be another video. Okay, but for now, you just need to know that there's going to be an F value, and it's going to test the main effect of your first factor. And it doesn't matter which factor you want to call first and second. This I called first, but I could have labeled that first. It doesn't matter, okay? All right, so we have religiosity, and this F value will see whether or not there's a significant difference somewhere among these means. All right, now the next F value is going to see if there is a main effect of concern category. So remember what a main effect is, right? A main effect just looks at one independent variable in a factorial ANOVA. So that means we know we have 2 or more variables, IVs. So we're going to look at just one independent variable, and this time we're going to ignore the other one. It's as if it doesn't exist. So this time, remember that concern category is represented by rows. So what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the mean of all the scores in this row. And that will be called the marginal mean for work. Right? And then we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to look at relationships. And we are going to calculate the mean for all the scores in this row. All right? And we're going to do the same thing for USA and the global world and the planet, okay? So we're going to end up with, this time, 5 marginal means. And then when we look at those 5, okay, we're going to look at them. We're going to look at the F value to compare these marginal means. So that's looking at the marginal means of concern category. And if that F value is significant, then we know that at least 2 of those means have to be different from one another. We don't know which 2, but we know that at least 2 are different. And again, we're going to have to use follow-up tests to identify where the differences are. Okay, we just know that something is different somewhere. And that, again, is the other video. Now, just in case I miss doing this, because I do recall telling you religiosity, remember, is between subjects. That means there are different people in each group, right? So practice religious and practice frequently Tom, Dick, and Harry, but we have a whole different set of people in this group, and then an entirely different set of people in that group, and so on. And concern category is within subjects, because if you look at who answered in the or who participated in the work condition, it's everybody, and everybody is tested under the relationship category, and once again, everybody's tested under USA, etc. So the same people are tested in each level of this factor. And now I think I did explain that to you, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it. All right, so far we've learned that when we run a two-way mixed ANOVA, any two-way ANOVA in fact, we're going to end up with two F values to test main effects. The main effect of religiosity, which asks the question, is there an effect of religiosity all by itself on optimism? That's one main effect, so you get one F value there. And then the second F value is going to test the main effect of this variable, this independent variable, concern category. And it's going to test whether concern category all by itself has any effect on optimism scores. Now, all two-way ANOVAs are going to have a third F value. Okay, because remember, at the very beginning I said we want to know if this affects optimism, religiosity. We want to know if concern category affects religiosity. But we also want to know if the combination of religiosity and concern category affects optimism. And that is called an interaction effect, right? And I am going to go into a bit more detail what interaction effects are. We only see them in factorial ANOVAs. You can't have an interaction if you only have one factor. But because we have two, that opens up the possibility that we might see a combined effect of our two variables, all right? And again, I'm going to go into more detail by showing you a graph, but for now, remember that when we looked at a main effect, like religiosity, the F value compared these marginal means down here, the mean of each column in this first case. And then when we looked at the main effect of concern category, again, that F value looked at marginal means. In this case, it was the mean for each row. All right, so we had these marginal means. But when you're looking at an interaction, you are looking at cell means. All right, now I didn't label each one a cell mean, but I think I've labeled enough so you'll get the picture. A cell mean represents the mean of a combination of treatments. So in this case, we have work, see, because it's the work level. It's work combined with religious and practicing frequently. So Tom, Dick, and Harry provided scores here where they are religious and practicing frequently, and they're answering questions about optimism, about work. All right, so that's a combination. Over here, if we look at this combination, we can get a mean of these scores, and these are scores Larry, Moe, and Curly provided. All right, so they are in the relationships category. So they're answering questions about relationships, and they are in the religious, practicing infrequently category. All right, so you see how it's just an intersection of the two conditions. So we just follow along here. This is religious, practicing infrequently, and they're answering questions about relationships. So that's true. If you want to look at each of these cell means, you'll see that each one represents a combination of two levels, right? One level comes from one factor. Where's my cursor? Okay, so if we look at this one, for example, this is one level of religiosity combined with one level of the concern category. So it's a combined treatment, all right? Okay, so the third F value is going to ask whether there is an effect of the combination of religiosity and concern category on optimism. And to answer that question, it is going to compare cell means, not marginal means, cell means. So remember that interaction effects look at cell means. All right? Okay, so moving on. This looks horrible. I'm going to take it apart for you. All right? So here we are looking at a potential interaction effect in a two-way ANOVA. So what we're plotting here are cell means. Let me go back for 1 second. Let's count how many cell means we have. It's an easy way to do this. Take the number of levels for your first factor, we have 4, and multiply them by the number of levels of your second factor. There are 5. So the number of cells is simply 4 times 5. So we have 20 cells. When we want to look for an interaction, what we need to do is plot all of these cell means. All right. So this graph here is actually, if you were to count, we have 20 bars. All right. 20 cell means 20 bars. All right. And then we have a legend over here, and it tells you what the different colors refer to. So this is religious and practicing regularly. So that's blue. Red is religious but practice infrequently. Green is religious but not practicing. And then finally, orange is not religious, so obviously, therefore, not practicing. Okay, so not religious. And so we have the mean for each of those different levels of religiosity, but this is their mean when combined with work. So when participants answered questions about optimism for work, and we're asking about optimism in the future, so I believe we're asking about optimism 5 years, what do you think your work success is going to be like 5 years down the road? Then this is how the religious and practicing frequently people responded. This is how religious and practicing infrequently responded to that question, and then so on. All right? So these different groups of religiosity answered the question about work, and here are their means. We're looking at mean optimism score. And then everybody then answered questions about optimism for relationships, personal relationships in the future, friends and family. And this shows you how each group, religiosity group, answered that question. All right. So we can see, for example, if they were religious and practicing frequently, they were way more optimistic. Well, way more. I mean, that's, I guess, subjective. But they were more optimistic than the people here who were not religious. Okay? And then we do the same thing. So we're plotting all the different people that belong to the different religiosity groups and how they answered the USA question, the global world question, and the planet. All right? Now, to see if there is an interaction, it's all about detecting patterns and then looking to see if there's any deviation from the pattern. So I'm actually going to start with this group here. Okay, so it's a little backwards, but we're going to start with the planet. And if we look at the pattern here, do you see a pattern? I do. I see that religious and practicing frequently are more optimistic than the other 3, and there doesn't appear to be too much difference between these other 3 groups of religiosity. This one certainly stands out. So it kind of goes like this. All right, so that's kind of the pattern. Now remember that. Now let's look at the next group over. Okay, see a similar pattern? All right, we called it the bloop pattern. I don't know. I'm making that up. But you can see that there is a definitive pattern here, and it appears to be more or less the same pattern we saw there. Okay, so far, whatever effect religiosity is having, when people are asked about the planet, we see an effect of religiosity, right? This group is higher than the other religious groups, but whatever that pattern is, it seems to be the same pattern over here when asked about the global world. So far the patterns are the same. So far we would say there is no interaction. All right. Now let's look at the next group. Okay, so for the USA question, do you see the pattern is more or less the same as what we saw for the global world and for the planet? When the patterns are the same, you see how we're moving from one level here to the next, to the next? See how the pattern doesn't change? That's telling you really there is no interaction effect. There's no combined effect of religiosity. And I lost my cursor. Here we go. There's no combined effect of religiosity and concern category. The pattern here is the same as the pattern here as it is here. So we are seeing differences, but it's not called an interaction. All right. So just because this group is higher than the other three doesn't mean there's an interaction. Remember, you have to look at patterns. So let's look at the next pattern over. This one's looking a little different now. All right, this group here, religious and practicing frequently, isn't standing out as much, at least not against this group here and this one, right? So whereas there was a sharp kind of like, here's religious and practicing frequently, and then the others kind of just level off real quick, there's a big difference between these three and this one. Here we start to see less of a difference, okay? So I'm detecting a bit of a pattern change here. Now, that suggests that because I've detected a pattern change compared to these other patterns, that I may have a significant interaction effect. Let's look at the last pattern. Now, you see how this pattern looks very different from the others? All right, so this was the same as this one. This was the same. Here we're starting to see a little bit of a difference. What if you look at this pattern and compare it to, let's say, this one? All right, do you see a big difference in the pattern? We have now detected an obvious pattern change. So there is a strong possibility that we will find a significant interaction effect. How are we going to know? Well, there's going to be a third F value. So remember, there was an F value to test for the main effect of religiosity. There was an F value to test for the main effect of concern category. Now there's going to be a third F value, and that's going to tell us whether we have a significant interaction effect. And if we do, it tells us that the effect of religion on optimism depends on which concern category we look at. So here we would say, like the effect of religion is such that if you're religious, you are far more optimistic about the planet compared to the other three groups. But that changes over here. If you look at optimism for work in the future, then there doesn't seem to be much of an effect of religiosity at all. So do you see how the effect that religion is having on optimism depends on whether we're looking at work versus planet, all right, versus relationships? So we get a different answer depending on which level of religiosity we look at. So that's telling us that there is an interaction effect. And again, we're going to look at the F value to see if that is significant. Now, this is one way of looking at an interaction effect. We can ask, does the effect of religion on optimism depend on which concern category we look at? But there's another way we can approach this. For example, we can ask, does the effect of concern category on optimism depend on which religiosity category we look at? And that's illustrated here. It's the same graph, okay? But we just reversed the independent variables. So now we're asking whether or not concern category, whether or not that, whatever effect that's having on optimism, whether that depends on which level of religiosity we look at. So now, instead of looking for a pattern here and then comparing it to a pattern there and so on, watch what we're going to do. We are going to look at the blue people. So the blue people, that's religious and practicing frequently. And we're going to establish, what does that pattern look like? All right, so we're just looking at optimism scores for the religious and practicing frequently. And we say, well, okay, so across, these particular groups of people, like this group of people, right, for religion, these are all the same people, right? These are all the religious and practicing frequently. It appears that they have the highest level of optimism for personal relationships, friends and family, right, compared to the other groups. All right, so that's kind of the picture we're getting when we look at the blue group. All right, I'm just going to say the different colors. It'll be a lot easier. Now let's see what happens if we look at the red group. Now watch the pattern, see if it changes. It's more or less the same pattern, right? We still see for this next group of people, the red group, it's still the case that this is the highest level of optimism. All right. So, and I might have, oh no, I described it correctly with the blue group. So as with the blue group, which was, again, religious and practice regularly, with this next group, religious and practice infrequently, so we're looking at the reds, it's still the case that the greatest level of optimism is for relationships, personal relationships. So I bet you can guess where we're going next. Yep, we're going to look at the green group. So here's what's going on. Watch for any pattern change. No, it's still the case. I mean, it's becoming less obvious, but for the green group, it's still the case that optimism for relationships does appear to be the highest relative to these other categories. USA, world, the planet, less so for work. I mean, like there's still a little bit of a difference here, but not huge. So far, I really haven't seen a difference in the pattern depending on which level of religion we're looking at. Well, let's look at the next group, which is orange. A little bit of a change here. Now, this is a little bit higher, but just barely. So even though we can say, what is orange? Orange is the not religious people. We can say they seem to have more optimism for work than family, which is different than the pattern we established with the other groups, but I don't know that this is a big enough difference that we're going to get a significant interaction. To me, looking at this data, I would say the pattern was more or less the same. Whether we looked at the effect of, because we're looking at differences here according to the concern category, whether or not there was an effective concern category for the blue, which there was, right? This was the highest one right here. So we can say the pattern was that optimism for relationships was the highest, okay? But that was true more or less whether we looked at the blue group, the red group, the green group, the yellow, orange group. I don't know my colors, all right? So because the pattern doesn't change, it's telling us that we probably do not want to look at this for the interaction. That's not where the interaction is. The interaction is not looking at the effect of concern category on optimism. It's the other one we looked at, the effect of religiosity according to concern category. All right? So sometimes interaction effects, you have to kind of look at it both ways to see what's going on. If we looked at it this way, where we're going to ask ourselves, well, what differences do we see with concern category, but we're going to do it one religion at a time? There doesn't really seem to be a pattern difference. All right? So whatever effect we're seeing here for religious and practicing frequently is the same pattern that we're finding for this next group and the next one and the next one. But when we looked at what effect does religion have, and we look at it just for work, and we got a pattern here, Then we looked and saw, well, what is the effect of religion here for relationships? We got a very different pattern, and then a different one here. All right, so again, to understand an interaction, you're looking for patterns, and you go about it two different ways. You can look for patterns within each level of whatever factor is on your x-axis. So you're looking at patterns here and comparing them. That's one way. Or you can compare blue to blue to blue to blue to blue, and then look at, identify the pattern there, and then do the same thing. Compare red to red to red to red, and compare those two patterns. All right, if the patterns are the same, probably that's not where the interaction is. Okay? All right, one last thing, and then we're going to be done for this video. When we look at a factorial ANOVA, specifically when we have a two-way mixed ANOVA, remember that we have two independent variables. One is within subjects and the other is between subjects. Well, if we look just at our within subjects factor, there's going to be an assumption about this factor that should be true in order for us to go ahead and interpret the two-way ANOVA. All right, and the within subjects factor in our experiment was concern category because everybody was in each level of this variable, okay, this independent variable. And when you have a within subjects factor, you're going to have to satisfy the assumption called sphericity. Where is that? Here. That's the assumption. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, any detail really, about what sphericity is. But what you need to know is that we want to have it. All right? If we have sphericity, that's good. It means the assumption holds. But if we don't have sphericity, that's bad because it means we have a violation. So how are we going to know if we have sphericity? Well, we test it with Mauchly's test. So if you're using SPSS, it's going to generate this automatically. It's called Mauchly's test, right? Test of sphericity. Now, you're going to get this generated automatically in your two-way, but there's one thing you need to know. And that is it gets tested only if that within subjects factor has 3 or more levels. If you only have 2 levels, you automatically have sphericity. So it doesn't need to get tested. But when you have 3 or more levels of your within subjects variable, your within subjects factor, you need to test it. And again, it's tested with Mauchly's. All right, now remember, if this test is violated, then that's bad. It means we have a violation. How are we going to know if sphericity is violated? We're going to look at the test result, the Mauchly's test, and we're going to hope it's not significant. All right, I tell all my students we never want our tests of assumptions to be significant. Okay, in all honesty, I tell them we never want our asses to be significant. So whatever you need to use to remember this. But this test, it's an assumption it's testing. We don't want it to be significant. If it is significant, then it means that our assumption is violated, which is bad. All right. I don't remember any situation where a violation is good. So it's bad. But the good news is that if you are using SPSS, it's going to give you automatically, whether the assumption is violated or not, it's going to give you a row of data called greenhouse geyser. And greenhouse geyser is just the output of the test that's been corrected. It's been corrected for the violation. All right. So when you are looking at the F value for the main effect of concern category, that's the within subjects variable, you would check for sphericity. If it's not significant, then yay, you can just look at your two-way ANOVA and you're going to look, it'll say sphericity assumed, all right? But if you look at Mauchly's test and it's significant, that means you have a violation. That is bad. And in SPSS, you're going to look for data where it says greenhouse geyser. So obviously, I'm not going to show you how to run the two-way ANOVA, two-way mixed ANOVA in this video, but I do have that video posted to my channel so you can watch it. But don't watch it yet because there's just one more assumption we need to test for. We not only have a within subjects factor in the two-way, we also have a between subjects factor. All right, that was religiosity. And that's where we have a different group of people in each category of religiosity. When you have a between subjects factor, you're always going to test it. You don't have that rule where it says 3 or more. Even if you only have 2 levels, you test it. And it's tested, well, in SPSS, the one I look at is Levine's test. All right, so this is a test to see if we have HOV. The F just is a little reminder here. It's just saying that you're going to look at an F value on SPSS, and it's going to be the F value for the Levine's test. All right. Now, again, I'm not going to go into detail about what HOVE is. It's short for homogeneity of variance. That'll be another video. But remember what I said about Mauchly's? Do we want this test to be significant? No, right? It's testing an assumption, and we never want our S's to be significant. So we're going to look at the results. Now, this is an F value just like the F in ANOVA, but it'll be F for Levine's test this time. We look at this F value, and we're going to look to see if it is significant. If it's not significant, then we are happy, okay? Because it means that the test for the assumption was not significant, which is what we want, and we can go ahead and look at the two-way ANOVA. We don't have to worry about a violation. But if, let's say, we have a violation, so let's say the F is significant, then we're not happy, right? Because again, if the F is significant, it means we have a violation. And there is no automatic correction for that violation. The one thing that you can do is you can, instead of saying something will be significant at 0.05, you might want to make it a little bit tougher. And so instead of using 0.05 as your alpha, your level of significance, the point which is the point at which you will say something is significant, all right? It's a little more complicated than that, but it's, again, another video. So instead of using alpha 0.05, you may want to use alpha 0.01, which will make it more difficult for you to find significant effects. But the reason why you're doing it is because you have a violation here, all right? So this is just something you do voluntarily. And now, finally, the very last thing. When you have a factorial ANOVA, you have a between subjects factor. In the case of a two-way mixed, you have a between and you have a within, right? That's where the mix comes in. The Levine's test for homogeneity of variance is actually going to be tested more than once because it gets tested for each level of the within subjects factor. Our within subjects factor was religiosity, and we had 4 levels. That means HOV is going to be tested 4 times, 1 for each level. All right. So if you're looking at the effect of religiosity, but just for work, you're going to get a Levine's test for that. And then you're going to look at a religiosity, and we're going to ask ourselves, do we have homogeneity of variance for religiosity, but just for relationships? We're going to get another F value. And we're kind of hoping that none of these tests prove to be significant, none of the Levine's tests, because, again, it means we've got a violation. All right, so I bet you are feeling like this right now. Well, I'm going to end this video here, and you can, I guess, look forward to part 2 of this video, which will be taking you through more specifically in more detail how we analyze a significant interaction effect in a two-way mixed ANOVA. All right. So stay tuned for that. And if you like this video, if it's helpful, don't forget to hit the like button. All right. See ya.